Somewhere right now, in a fluorescent-lit garden center on the outskirts of a suburban sprawl, a man is loading his truck. He's stacking bags, heavy, black, plastic-wrapped bags, one on top of another. 8 bags, 10 bags, 12. Each one stamped with words like premium organic mix, professional grade, and enriched with slow-release nutrients. He doesn't know what those words mean. Not really. He just knows the label told him his tomatoes need it. His back aches. His wallet is $47 lighter, and the soil inside those bags, that dark, crumbly, sweet-smelling substance he's been promised will make his garden thrive, was stripped from a peat bog in Canada that took 4,000 years to form. 4 millennia of slow, patient accumulation, of sphagnum moss compressing under rain and silence. Air is creating one of the most powerful carbon sinks on the planet. And he just bought 12 bags of it to fill some raised beds he built from a Pinterest tutorial. He'll do this again next spring. And the spring after that, year after year, buying soil as though it were a consumable, like paper towels or laundry detergent. As though dirt were something that gets used up and must be repurchased. As though the earth beneath his feet were somehow insufficient. This is the lie. This is the magnificent, profit-driven, ecologically devastating lie that the modern gardening industry has sold to 3 generations of homeowners. That you cannot grow food without buying their product. That the ground you stand on is dead unless they resurrect it with a bag. That the scraps from your kitchen, the fallen leaves in your yard, what the cardboard in your recycling bin, the wood chips rotting behind the neighbor's fence, that all of this is trash, worthless, disposable. It is not trash. It is the most powerful soil-building material on Earth. And the fact that you've been taught to throw it away while simultaneously spending money on sterilized, nutrient-depleted, peat-based mixes shipped 1,000 miles to your door is not an accident. It is a business model, one that depends entirely on your ignorance. What you are about to hear will dismantle that ignorance, completely, irreversibly, and by the end, you will never look at a pile of leaves, a heap of kitchen scraps, or a stack of old newspapers the same way again. Because buried inside what you've been calling garbage is a soil-building secret so old, so effective, and so dangerously simple that the entire $60 billion potting soil industry would collapse overnight if every gardener in the country learned it at the same time. They almost did once. And then the secret was quietly buried, not in the soil where it belonged, but in the margins of history where powerful people hoped it would stay forgotten. The year was 1935. The southern plains of the United States had become a howling wasteland. The topsoil, centuries of accumulated fertility, the living skin of the continent, was airborne. It moved in walls of black dust that blotted out the sun at noon. Cattle suffocated in the fields. Children coughed blood. Families loaded everything they owned into broken-down trucks and drove west toward a California that didn't want them. The Dust Bowl was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made apocalypse, born from the collision of industrial ambition and biological ignorance. The great grasslands of the plains had been ripped open by steel plows, their root systems destroyed, their mycorrhizal networks shattered. The soil, exposed and naked, simply blew away. In some places, 6 inches of topsoil vanished in a single season. 6 inches that had taken nature 1,000 years to build. But not everywhere. In the hills of the Ozarks, in small hollows of Appalachia, in forgotten pockets of rural Georgia, and the pine barrens of East Texas, there were gardens that didn't die. Small plots, tended by people whose names never appeared in newspapers, people who couldn't afford bags of anything, people who had never heard the word fertilizer and wouldn't have bought it if they had. And these were subsistence gardeners, many of them black sharecroppers, indigenous families, and poor white hill farmers, who practiced a form of soil building so intuitive, so ancient, and so effective that their gardens produced abundantly in the middle of an ecological catastrophe. What were they doing? They were burying their waste. Not in a landfill, not in a compost pile, carefully turned and monitored with a thermometer like some modern weekend hobby. No, they were doing something far older and far more radical. They were digging trenches in their garden rows and filling them with everything the modern world told them to discard. Kitchen scraps, bones, fish heads, rotten logs, leaves, ash, eggshells, corn cobs, newspaper, hair clippings, the guts from a slaughtered chicken, the whey left over from making cheese. They covered it all with dirt, planted directly on top, and moved on. One woman in particular, her name appears only in the faded field notes of a USDA soil surveyor named Harold Bennett, who was cataloging erosion damage across the South in 1936, was growing sweet potatoes the size of a man's forearm in soil that neighboring farms had abandoned as dead. Her name was recorded simply as Mrs. Delia. No last name, no photograph. Just a brief notation in Bennett's journal, Negro woman, approximately. 60 years, garden producing exceptional yields. Uses no purchased amendments. Buries all household waste directly in planting rows. Soil dark, friable, worm-rich to a depth of nearly 2 feet. Surrounding land barren. 2 feet of living soil, in the middle of the Dust Bowl, while the nation's most advanced farms were turning to dust. Bennett, Ike, to his credit, was fascinated. He spent 3 days with Mrs. Delia. He documented her method in detail. He noted how she rotated her burial trenches, how she never put the same type of waste in the same spot 2 seasons in a row, how she covered everything with a thick layer of leaves and straw before mounding the soil back over it. He noted how her garden hummed, literally vibrated, with biological activity. Earthworms by the hundreds in every shovelful. Beetles, centipedes. The soil smelled not of rot, but of rain, that deep petrichor scent that rises from ground teeming with actinomycetes bacteria. Bennett included Mrs. Delia's method in a preliminary report he submitted to Washington, recommending further study of what he called subsistence burial cultivation as a potential model for soil restoration across the devastated plains. The report was edited. Her section was removed. The final publication focused exclusively on terracing, contour plowing, and the newly emerging chemical fertilizer applications being promoted by the nascent industrial agriculture lobby. Mrs. Delia's method, free, effective, requiring no purchased inputs, was exactly the kind of knowledge that threatened a very specific and very powerful set of emerging interests. The fertilizer companies were coming. And they needed America's farmers to believe that the soil was broken and only chemistry could fix it. To understand why burying organic waste directly into garden soil works with such devastating effectiveness, you have to abandon the way modern agriculture taught you to think about dirt. The conventional framework treats soil as a static medium, a sponge, essentially, into which you pour nutrients in liquid or granular form, and from which plants extract those nutrients like straws in a glass. This is a grotesque oversimplification. It is the equivalent of describing the human body as a bag that holds blood. Soil is alive. 1 tablespoon of healthy garden soil contains more microorganisms than there are humans on this planet. We are talking about bacteria, billions of them, in colonies so dense and diverse that modern science has only identified a fraction. We are talking about fungi, specifically mycorrhizal fungi, whose hyphal networks extend for miles underground, connecting plant root systems in a communication web so sophisticated that researchers at the University of British Columbia began calling it the Wood Wide Web in the late 1990s. We are talking about protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, and earthworms, each performing a specific function in a biological assembly line that converts raw organic matter into plant-available nutrition with a precision that no factory on Earth can replicate. When you bury kitchen scraps, leaves, cardboard, wood chips, or any carbon-rich and nitrogen-rich organic material directly into the soil, you are not simply adding nutrients. You are igniting a biological firestorm. Here is what happens, step by step, at a level of detail the gardening industry does not want you to understand. First, the moisture content of the buried material creates an anaerobic microenvironment in the immediate vicinity of the waste. This is critical. Unlike traditional composting, which relies on aerobic decomposition and requires constant turning to maintain oxygen flow, trench burial initiates a different decomposition pathway. Facultative anaerobes, bacteria that can operate with or without oxygen, begin breaking down simple sugars and starches within hours. This initial phase produces organic acids, lactic acid, acetic acid, butyric acid, that begin dissolving mineral particles in the surrounding soil, unlocking phosphorus, calcium, and trace elements like zinc and manganese that were previously bound in insoluble forms. Within days, the anaerobic zone is colonized by fermentative bacteria that produce enzymes capable of breaking down cellulose and hemicellulose, the structural polymers in plant cell walls. This is the same class of enzymatic activity that occurs in the rumen of a cow, the digestive tract of a termite, or the floor of an old-growth forest. The temperature in the burial zone rises slightly, not to the 130 to 160 degree range of a hot compost pile, but to a moderate sustained warmth of 80 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. This gentle exothermic reaction does not kill beneficial organisms the way a hot compost pile can. Instead, it creates an incubation chamber. Fungal colonization begins next. Saprophytic fungi, the great decomposers, send exploratory hyphae into the buried material, secreting enzymes that break down lignin, the tough, complex polymer that gives wood its rigidity. Lignin is the last barricade. Once it falls, the remaining organic matter becomes humus, that dark, spongy, impossibly stable substance that is the holy grail of soil science. Humus has a cation exchange capacity that dwarfs anything a synthetic fertilizer can offer. It holds nutrients like a reservoir and releases them slowly, in response to root exudates from plants that are essentially requesting specific elements through chemical signals. This is a conversation between plant and soil, a dialogue. A living negotiation that has been refined over 400 million years of terrestrial evolution. And you activated all of it by burying a banana peel in some shredded newspaper. The NPK ratio of this process is not fixed, and that is precisely the point. Synthetic fertilizers deliver nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in predetermined ratios, 10-10-10, 5-10-5, whatever the factory decided. But plants don't need nutrients in fixed ratios. Their needs shift weekly, daily, even hourly, depending on growth stage, temperature, light exposure, and water availability. The biological system created by buried organic matter responds to these shifting demands dynamically. Mycorrhizal fungi deliver phosphorus to a fruiting tomato plant at exactly the moment the flowers are setting. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria ramp up activity when a leafy green is pushing new growth. This is not a fertilizer. This is an immune system. This is intelligence without a brain. And the water retention alone should make every gardener who has ever bought a bag of potting soil feel physically ill. Humus-rich soil created through organic burial can hold up to 20 times its weight in water. Peat-based potting mixes, by contrast, become hydrophobic when they dry out. They actually repel water. You've seen it. You pour water on dry potting soil and it runs off the top, channeling down the sides of the pot, leaving the root zone parched. You paid $8 for that bag of water-repelling dust. The waste you threw in the garbage last night would have built something that drinks rain and holds it for weeks. So if this method is so effective, so biologically sound, so historically proven, so elegantly simple, why did we stop? Why do billions of dollars change hands every year in the potting soil and chemical fertilizer industries? Why does the average American gardener spend between $300 and $600 annually on soil amendments, fertilizers, and garden mixes when the raw materials for building superior soil are sitting in their kitchen trash can every single night? The answer begins in 1909 in a laboratory in Karlsruhe, Germany, where a chemist named Fritz Haber succeeded in synthesizing ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. His partner, Karl Bosch, scaled the process to industrial production. The Haber-Bosch process, as it came to be known, is arguably the most consequential invention in human history. It enabled the mass production of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, which in turn enabled the mass production of food, which in turn enabled the global population to explode from 1.6 billion in 1900 to over 8 billion today. But it also did something else, something less celebrated. It severed the ancient relationship between the farmer and the soil. Before Haber-Bosch, every farmer on Earth understood, whether through science or intuition, that the soil had to be fed. Organic matter had to return to the ground. Waste was not waste. It was next year's harvest. This understanding was encoded in every agricultural tradition on the planet, from the Chinampas of the Aztecs to the paddy systems of Southeast Asia to the three-field rotation of medieval Europe. The soil was a living partner, and you fed it or you starved. Synthetic nitrogen changed the equation. Suddenly, you could pour granules on dead dirt and watch plants grow. The soil didn't need to be alive anymore. It just needed to hold the plant upright while the chemicals did the work. Farmers stopped burying waste. They stopped composting. They stopped rotating crops with legumes. They didn't need to. The blue-white crystals of ammonium nitrate could force growth from sand. And the corporations behind those crystals understood something profound about human psychology. Once you teach a person to depend on a purchased product, they forget they ever knew how to do without it. Within 2 generations, the knowledge that Mrs. Delia and millions like her carried, knowledge older than civilization itself, was functionally extinct in mainstream agriculture. The gardening industry followed the same playbook. The same companies that sold fertilizer to farmers began marketing to homeowners. Potting soil, once an absurd concept, you're buying dirt, became normalized. Garden centers proliferated. The message was relentless, saturating magazines, television shows, and eventually social media. Your soil is not enough. You need our product, you need our brand, you need to buy your way to a garden. And the waste? The kitchen scraps, the leaves, the cardboard, the very materials that Mrs. Delia used to build 2 feet of living soil in the middle of an ecological apocalypse, they were reclassified. They became garbage. Municipalities built massive infrastructure to collect them, truck them to landfills, and bury them under plastic liners where they would decompose anaerobically and produce methane, a greenhouse gas 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year horizon. Let that equation settle in your mind. We take the most powerful soil-building material on Earth, haul it to a landfill at taxpayer expense, let it generate greenhouse gases, and then drive to a garden center to buy a bag of dead peat ripped from a Canadian wetland. This is not inefficiency. This is engineered dependency. And it is the foundation upon which a multi-billion-dollar industry rests. Enough history. Enough outrage. Let's build soil. Here is the method, stripped of commercial nonsense, delivered the way it would have been taught by a grandmother who never owned a bag of potting mix in her life. You will need a garden bed, or even just a patch of ground. It does not have to be large. 4 feet by 8 feet is more than enough to begin. You will need a shovel, or a broad fork, or even a sturdy stick if that's all you have. And you will need what your culture has trained you to call trash. Dig a trench. 12 inches deep, 12 inches wide, running the length of your bed. Set the excavated soil to one side. Do not throw it away. That soil is your covering layer. Now, fill the trench. Never start with a layer of carbon-heavy material at the bottom. This is your structural foundation, the slow-burning fuel that will feed fungal networks for years. Cardboard is superb. Tear it into rough pieces. Remove any tape or glossy coatings, but standard brown corrugated cardboard is pure cellulose and lignin. It is, biologically speaking, compressed wood. Newspaper works as well. Printed with soy-based inks, it is entirely safe. Shredded office paper, paper bags, paper egg cartons. All of this goes in first, 4 to 6 inches thick if you have it. On top of the carbon layer, add nitrogen-rich material. This is the accelerant, the biological match that ignites decomposition. Kitchen scraps are your primary source. Vegetable peels, fruit rinds, coffee grounds, which are slightly acidic and beloved by earthworms. Crushed eggshells, ammoid which provide calcium carbonate that will slowly buffer soil pH for years. Tea leaves, rice, pasta, stale bread, the wilted lettuce you forgot in the back of the refrigerator, the strawberries that went soft, all of it. There are materials to avoid, and you must understand why, not simply obey a list. Do not bury meat, fish, or dairy in shallow trenches in areas with heavy rodent or raccoon populations. Not because these materials are bad for soil, but because they will attract scavengers that will dig up your trench before decomposition is complete. If you live in a rural area with minimal pest pressure, or if you bury these materials at 18 inches or deeper, they are extraordinarily nutrient-dense additions. Fish heads and bones, in particular, are among the most phosphorus-rich amendments available. Wixus, the Tisquantum, the Wampanoag man the English called Squanto, famously taught the Plymouth colonists to bury fish with their corn seed. That story has been sanitized into a children's tale, but the biochemistry behind it is profound. Fish tissue delivers nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, and trace minerals in a matrix that decomposes at a rate perfectly synchronized with the growth cycle of maize. Do not, under any circumstances, bury treated or pressure-treated wood. The chromated copper arsenate used in older treated lumber and the alkaline copper quaternary compounds used in modern versions are biocides. They are specifically designed to kill the very microorganisms you are trying to cultivate. Using treated wood in your trench is like inoculating a patient and then injecting them with poison. Do not bury synthetic materials. Plastic, styrofoam, synthetic fabric. These do not decompose. They fragment into microplastics that will persist in your soil for centuries. This should be obvious, but in an era when compostable plastic bags are marketed as green alternatives, most of which require industrial composting facilities operating at 140 degrees Fahrenheit to actually break down, it bears explicit warning. Once your trench is filled to within 4 inches of the surface, add a thin layer of dried leaves, straw, or wood chips. This serves as a moisture regulation buffer, preventing the burial zone from becoming waterlogged while maintaining the consistent dampness that decomposer organisms require. Now pull the excavated soil back over the trench. Mound it slightly. It will settle as the material below decomposes. Water it once, deeply. To initiate microbial colonization. You can plant into this bed immediately if the trench is deep enough that roots will not contact raw, undecomposed material in the first few weeks. Alternatively, prepare your trenches in autumn, let them overwinter, and plant in spring. A winter's worth of freeze-thaw cycles will physically break down the buried material, while cold-tolerant psychrophilic bacteria continue the decomposition process even under snow. The following season, dig your new trench next to the first one. Use the decomposed material from the old trench, now rich, dark, crumbly humus teeming with life, as your planting medium. By the third year, your entire bed will be a self-generating soil factory. You will never purchase potting mix again, not because you are too stubborn or too cheap, but because what you are producing is superior in every measurable dimension: water retention, nutrient density, microbial diversity, structural stability, to anything available in a plastic bag at any price. In 2018, a retired schoolteacher in Detroit named Marcus Cole began trench composting in his backyard, using nothing but kitchen scraps, shredded junk mail, and leaves he collected from the street. His lot was 40 feet wide, typical of the city's east side, where thousands of homes had been demolished and the remaining soil was compacted, clay contaminated with decades of industrial fallout. The city had classified the land as unsuitable for food production. Within 2 years, Cole was growing collard greens, tomatoes, peppers, and sweet potatoes in soil he had built entirely from waste. His yields, documented by a researcher at Michigan State University who stumbled upon his garden during an urban agriculture survey, exceeded the per-square-foot production of commercially managed plots using purchased raised bed mixes. His soil tests showed organic matter content of 11%, nearly triple the national average for garden soil and higher than most commercial potting mixes. His microbial biomass readings were, in the researcher's words, comparable to undisturbed prairie. He built prairie soil, in Detroit, from garbage. In rural Oregon, a woman named Sandra Whitfield has been practicing what she calls feed-the-dirt farming on her 3-acre homestead since 2012. She hasn't purchased a soil amendment of any kind in over a decade. Every autumn, she digs a network of trenches across her garden and fills them with everything: kitchen waste, fallen apples, goat manure, wood chips from a local arborist who is happy to dump them for free, cardboard from the recycling center, even old cotton clothing cut into strips. Her soil, once thin and rocky, typical of the decomposed granite soils of the southern Cascades, is now 18 inches of dark, loamy, worm-riddled fertility that she describes as smelling like chocolate cake after a rain. Her neighbors, she says, still buy potting soil every spring. They comment on her garden. They ask what fertilizer she uses. When she tells them, they don't believe her. They think she's withholding the real secret, some product, some brand, some trick she saw online. The real trick is that there is no trick. There is only the willingness to see what you've been throwing away and recognize it for what it truly is. There is a particular kind of violence in convincing a population that the materials of life are worthless, that fallen leaves are litter, that food scraps are refuse, that the natural cycle of growth, death, and decomposition, the very engine that built every inch of topsoil on this planet, is something to be managed by sanitation departments and landfill operators rather than by the hands of the people who eat the food. This disconnection did not happen by accident. It was engineered, layer by layer, decade by decade, by industries that profit from your dependence. The fertilizer company needs you to believe your soil is deficient. The potting mix manufacturer needs you to believe your yard waste is garbage. And the pesticide corporation needs you to believe that the insects in your soil are enemies rather than allies. Each of these beliefs is a revenue stream. Each one costs you money, costs the earth its fertility, and costs you something even more valuable than both: your sovereignty. Because a person who can build soil from waste is a person who does not need the system. A person who understands that a banana peel, a torn-up cereal box, and a pile of autumn leaves contain everything necessary to grow food. That person is dangerous. Not dangerous in the way the powerful fear violence. Dangerous in the way they fear irrelevance. Every trench you dig is an act of defiance. Every kitchen scrap you bury instead of bagging is a declaration that you refuse to participate in the artificial scarcity that keeps you dependent. Every handful of dark, living soil you pull from a bed you built yourself, from nothing, from what others discarded, is proof that the system lied. The soil is not dead. It was never dead. It was waiting for you to stop buying the lie and start feeding the ground. Mrs. Delia knew this. Marcus Cole knows this. Sandra Whitfield knows this. Every subsistence farmer, every indigenous grower, every peasant gardener who ever lived and fed a family from a patch of earth they built with their own hands and their own waste, they all knew this. Now you know it too. The question is not whether the method works. 4,000 years of human agriculture, 2 feet of Dust Bowl soil, and a retired schoolteacher in Detroit have already answered that question. The question is what you'll do tomorrow morning. And when you stand in your kitchen holding a handful of vegetable scraps over the trash can, you'll hesitate, you'll remember, and then you'll walk outside.